grounding our feet in the grass, and we're going to talk about the benefits of a flop era. So, if you don't know, flop era, yet another genius term coined by Gen Z. There's my face, just so we remember what it looks like. A genius term coined by none other than Gen Z. um, a flop era is a chapter or period of time, an era in which you are kind of stagnating, not reaching your goals, not operating at full capacity, and likely having a tough time and um, just kind of going through it. So I feel like this is said a lot of, like failure or flopping or whatever, going through rough times, of course, is part of life and um, part of part of the journey and part of success or progress. In that we learn a lot from failure. We learn a lot about what doesn't work. It's kind of loud. Hang on. I want to make sure you guys can hear me. So let's go. Let's scuttle. Let's scuttle back here where the cars are not so noisy. Hang on. Okay. Back to another little patch of grass. Okay. Hopefully that's not so noisy. Anyway, I feel like there's a lot of, you know, those are concepts or perspectives that we've probably heard a lot around the necessity and the benefits of failure and having rough times, um, developing empathy, humility, compassion, perseverance, um, gaining perspective around what it is or kind of context that around what it is to be flopping, such that when we're flowing, it is all the sweeter. And, I agree with all of that. But I think it's worth noting that when we are actively in our flop era, um, hearing that may provide some, hearing all of those things I just shared that are kind of like common perspectives, um, or what's often reflected back to us when we're having a hard time, it still doesn't make it any the more fun to go through. So, a couple things I want to suggest or kind of perspectives or like dimensions to flesh out to that perspective that have helped me in flop eras. And I would also say I am currently transcending a rather prolonged flop era, um, which I can get into another time. But, I've been operating, I had a real experience, a very disruptive event, um, and then have been operating at probably like 30% of my capacity for a bit. And in terms of like external output, um, internally, I have grown a lot and experienced like a lot of progress. But hi, humans, welcome to my daisy fields. Um, anyway, so a couple of perspectives or like dimensions of this that I want to flesh out that's hopefully helpful for you if you are currently currently in a flop era or will be in a flop era at some point because we all go through them, right? So one thing that I think is really helpful, a perspective that's really helpful, because sometimes when we are flopping, we're in our flop era. Part of what can be really frustrating about that, even going through it, but coming out the other side of it too, is the feeling or the story that we've wasted time and that we can feel, maybe I'm alone in this, but maybe you guys can relate. It can be frustrating to feel that you have regressed or gone off course, or that you have otherwise like wasted time flopping and spinning your wheels out. So, what I really believe and choose to believe, and I want to recognize that um, there's a lot of choice in the perspective that we hold, and this is going to be easier to hold this perspective in certain moments than others. But the flop and the flop era, I believe, is not a digression from the path. It's part of the path. So for me, it's been really helpful to reframe it like that. So what I mean by this is, okay, just to give an example, there's this guy on TikTok. His name is Nikki something. You could probably find him if you look up this series I'm going to describe. But he does this series. Um, I think the title of it is something like "It Takes 10 Years to Make an Overnight Success." And I love this series so much. I find it really encouraging because what he does is he um, showcases a different artist or public figure, someone who, by most societal metrics, we would deem to be successful. And um, he basically outlines their path and how long they've been persevering at what they've been doing, all of the setbacks or flop eras they've gone through, etc. And and also then kind of the moment that they pop off or start to become successful in external ways that we know to recognize, and gain traction. So recently he was doing a video on Chappell Roan, who I love Chappell Roan's music, and Chappell Roan has been persevering in her music career for a really long time. Um, and I found it really inspiring. He was describing how she got, she was grinding. She's from this small town in Missouri. She was grinding. She moved out to LA by herself, was working with this producer, got signed by a record label, put out this first album, and then pretty consecutively, the record label dropped her. And then, like a week later, her partner of 4 years dumped her. And I think because she got dropped by the label, the producer she was working with, like, stopped working with her. And basically, she had to go home to Missouri to work. I think it might have been like Dairy Queen somewhere. She was a barista, I think. Um, and she was nannying and she was kind of working odd jobs, brokenhearted and back home. And, we could very much have been dropped by her record label, all these things, dumped. We could very much call this a flop era. But she alchemized that, went through it, I'm sure had a lot of doubt and discouragement. But the producer she had been working with actually was also the one who had been working with Olivia Rodrigo, who, shortly after Chappell got dropped from the label, Olivia Rodrigo, who was the other person working with her producer, released her debut album, which was, like, you may recall, one of the most, I think, like the most successful female debut album of all time. So that probably stung, because this is produced by this person that Chappell was working with. Anyway, she's in her flop era. She's working as a nanny, as a barista back home in Missouri. She is heartbroken, and she keeps going. She keeps going, and she writes another album. And um, you know, I'm sure we can say long story short, but long story short is maybe a nice way to think of our flop era, because it's another thing to be in it, and uh, be tracking through the muck of a flop era. But long story short, the producer that Chappell was working with ends up getting her slot to open for Olivia Rodrigo on the Guts tour. Chappell starts getting more exposure to audiences, opening for Olivia Rodrigo. And then I think she signs with a new. Wait, no, this is what happens. The producer she was working with creates his own record label specifically to sign Chappell. Like, she's his only client. He makes it basically to sign her because I think she couldn't get signed. And about 4 months ago, she like leaves the Guts tour with Olivia Rodrigo and goes and performs at Coachella. And her listenership, she just blows up. She just blew up like 4 months ago. Her listenership multiplies by 17 times. I remember that number from this guy Nikki's report on this. Anyway, most of the songs, she has this song Good Luck Babe, which maybe like most of the songs that are now her most popular songs that are completely popping off are songs that she wrote in her flop era about her flop era, like about her heartbreak or the frustration, all of the things. So they're so raw, they're so real, they're so relatable to so many people, because I think it's such a relatable experience to have or go through a flop era, a time when things are not flowing for us, when we feel stagnant and like we're failing. But I was really inspired by that story, thus deciding to relay it to you in detail, of Chappell Roan, because it to me exemplifies how it anchors in this belief and this conviction that like we can't see the flop era as a waste of time or a digression from our path. It's actually a part of our path. And sometimes our path, um, we need to digress, or we need to get disconnected from our truth or ourselves in a certain way and then, the universe comes and intervenes and is like, you're not allowed to progress this way, right? Like, you're going to be stuck until you realign, until you reevaluate and figure out all the things that are not working, right? Until you confront these things about yourself, until as your skills and your perseverance get sharpened. Um, and those skills, those experiences, the perseverance that we develop, and like the humility, the ability to meet ourselves in times of flopping and times of failure, that's what we call on in order to propel ourselves, or to kind of be in flow, or to progress on the other side of that flop era. How are you guys relating to this, those who are watching live? Like, what's coming up for you as I'm saying this? So that's the first thing that I really want to highlight, is that like, if you're in a flop era, and or if you can log this in your memory now for when you inevitably go through a flop era in some capacity at one point. um it's part of the path. And whatever, like, sometimes it doesn't look like things are progressing externally, but there's like an intense reckoning, or sometimes like we almost need to confront our worst fears, or have these worst fear things happen, so that we are free ourselves from the fear of that thing, right? So with Chapel, I don't know her, but I'm going to, let's say, for example, that it was a worst fear for Chapel to get dropped by a record label, right? It's like that happening. Yeah, it absolutely sucks to go through, but like once you go through something that you're afraid of like that, and you know, stay with yourself with it and you come out the other side, that fear no longer holds as much power over you. It's not like you would welcome it necessarily, but there is something you connect with in yourself, and that where like you're you free yourself from that fear because and you untangle projections of um what you were making that mean in the first place, right? So that's what I believe. We've got to see, and I think the point with the Chapel Rowan story that is really important is like the songs, her most popular songs that have had her pop off so much. Like recently, she did a music festival and like attracted a bigger crowd than Ed Sheeran. Like she just popped off like 4 months ago. Um, and my very hipster self is like, oh, I've been listening to Chapel Roan for years now. But the point is, like, the songs that were are making her the most successful right now are songs she wrote in and about her flop era. Like that to me is really inspiring. She couldn't be where she is now, having the momentum that she's having now, if it weren't for these songs, these works of art that she created. She couldn't have created without going through XYZ things, right? Flop era. So it's not a digression from the path. It's part of the path, and it's an opportunity for us to clear up our projections, liberate ourselves from our fears, sometimes by going through those fears. Um, Develop the skills and sharpen our craft, and just kind of like focus in on what matters to us, develop the necessary perseverance. um, so that perspective really helps me, and I hope it helps you guys too. The second thing, I think I already said it, but this perspective really helps me too, of like in the flop, something is getting sharpened in yourself, something is getting honed in you. And actually, even if you're not like performing or producing or creating or whatever at your capacity in an external sense, in a satisfying way that has a sense of flow to it, um, you actually you are honing, sharpening, and expanding your capacity to your inner capacity to not be so afraid of failure, right? Like once you've kind of flopped on a number of things, usually it's like, okay, it's like, it sucks, but like, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. You're going to move on. And you have the choice to, sure, you could double down on that fear of like, oh God, this can't happen again. But you can also take it as an opportunity to be liberated from that fear and see, okay, like this happened. I'm here. Like I'm I'm still okay. I feel that way. This is a different thing because it's not flop era specific per se, but like I feel that way with my dad passing away. He passed away in August. Um, and that is like, obviously kind of a worst fear type situation of a parent passing away. Like it feels really vulnerable to even like think about that. I have a memory of when I was little, like realizing one day my dad was going to die and being like, oh no, just like crying in my bed. So there is something I feel like alongside my grief, in that there is something liberating I feel. Whoa, oops, okay, good, I'm still going. There is something liberating I feel in being on the other side of this like worst fear event, because it's like this sucks, and also like I'm still here, like I'm okay. um there's like a way that I know now I can kind of handle life, right? Oh, yeah, you guys wrote in comments. Okay, let's see. Sorry it took me a while to see that. The sun was in my face. Okay. um I'm currently in the flop era. I'm sorry to hear that. My father passed away 9 years ago. I cried in therapy about it yesterday. Oh, I'm sorry to hear about your dad too. Yeah, it's and it's, yeah, see, it's just like just with you. It comes up. It's still with you, and I'm sure you've related to it in your own way. But I'm curious if you relate to what I say too. Of like, there's something kind of liberating in being on the other side of something we're so afraid to happen. Do you feel that? Thanks for sharing that. Um, Also, have you did you hear the first part of what I said of the flop era is it's part of the path? Listen back whenever I stop this if you didn't catch that. So yeah, that's the first piece is it's not a digression, it's part of the path. It's an invitation. The flop era is an invitation to, I believe it's a way of the universe kind of like stalling you because things are out of alignment in some way. And so it's like you have to, if you were to continue to have momentum in the way that things are, you would go down a path that's not the path, right? So it's like a way, almost like a bumper car situation where it's like you're going the wrong way. Like we're gonna like stall you out so that you can get frustrated and start to reevaluate, okay, what's not in alignment for me? What am I like doing or working towards that's actually not right for me? And what do I need to reevaluate um, in order to kind of like get back in alignment so I can feel this flow? I wonder if you relate to that. Yes, the flop era is not a waste of time. Totally. And it's like it's really important. I just think being in it, it's really important to remind ourselves of these things. And then the second thing being that, like, whatever's happening inside of you right now in the flop era is like something's being sharpened. Your capacity is being expanded. You're liberating yourself from fears, right? Um, if we choose to address it that way. And that's really what I have found. And then what I noticed too, or I think the place where I'm at right now, kind of transcending, oh, bumblebee, transcending my flop era is like, I think for all that we're saying, it's like there's almost a discipline you need to have in choosing to see these perspectives, because it is easy to go into the mind space of like, being really hard on yourself or really self-critical, feeling like you've wasted time, all of these things. But to that, one, what I'm currently doing is doing my best to like alchemize that frustration and all that pent up energy, to just like alchemize that into motivation and focus of what I'm moving into. And then I think what's also helpful um, is hello. Um, I'm accepting my affinity for men through this flop era. I was pushing it way over 5 years. Tell me more about that. Are you um, are you a man yourself? That's huge. Well, I'd love to hear more context from you. But that's huge, right? I think that's a testament to what we were just saying of like there's a stalling out that happens that like prompts you to actually connect with your truth. Um, I'm really excited for you. Anyway, feel free to share more if you want to. That's my interpretation. Apologies if my interpretation is not. Yes, I am. Okay. Awesome. I'm so excited for you. And, we could see that and be like, "Oh god, 5 years, it's so long." But it's like, there are people who live their entire lives not connecting with their truth, Like, it's not too late. And in the grand scheme of things, like, and I think this is something that, I've been doing my best to keep in perspective as well. I'm accepting I'm bisexual. Awesome. I'm also bisexual. That's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. That's really cool. Um, is like, in the grand scheme of things, a handful of years is not that long a time, you know? And like, it is and it isn't, but like, we just gotta like choose that perspective of like that 5 years of maybe internal dissonance and kind of stagnancy or whatever it is, like fighting yourself in some way. And apology, I'm just kind of like extrapolating on this theme. So if this doesn't totally align with your experience, I apologize for that, but I'm just gonna kind of spitball with the concept. Um, nice, thanks for the smiley face. Back at you. Um, what was I saying? Uh, oh yeah, the grand scheme of things, 5 year. Oh yeah, that and like it's. I would rather, and this is my perspective too, and my transcendence of flop era. Like, I'd actually rather like confront things that aren't working sooner rather than later because, there's a lot of people that don't, or like they ignore that dissonance, or they use substances to push it down or whatever it is. And they maybe just kind of live somewhat miserably for their whole lives because they're not living their truth, or they have like a massively disruptive crisis later in life where it's never too late, but like I feel like the deeper you get into life, or like the longer you have resisted a truth, it's like it can feel even more disruptive where things are more solidified in place and structured in place in a certain way in your life down the line to deviate from that structure. Um, so I feel like that's a really good thing to keep in mind as well, of like, better to, have this internal dissonance for 5 years or whatever it is, and kind of really reckon with what is out of alignment, or like what needs to be rearranged and kind of acknowledged in order for you to like step into more flow and more truth. And then those 5 years, it like, you're giving yourself the gift of like hopefully decades of living in truth with yourself, which is wonderful and so worth it. um yeah. Luke chapter 24, where it says, Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word. Luke describes Christ as being a human being. Huh. Not sure if you didn't finish your thought there. Okay, I'm gonna just move on. um, but thanks for sharing. Um, anyway, I really encourage anyone listening to this who is going through or emerging from a time of like stagnancy to, um, one, like learn about and examine the flop eras of people you admire. Look for evidence of how that flop era was actually essential for the flow on the other side. And look for, okay, like what was the alignment that happened, the reckoning that happened within that flop era, and or like what were the skills and strengths and capacities sharpened and honed that actually enabled and set the stage for the flow afterwards. um it can be really helpful to find evidence like that. And look at, okay, um, how can I be grateful for the stalling in that? Had I continued deeper down this road that like was not the road for me, or like not truthful to me, um had I been able to like succeed and progress in this way that like wasn't authentic to myself, it would be that much harder and like more scary and painful to actually align to what I need to align to be happy and be in flow with myself. So, like the stalling and the stagnancy, as frustrating as it is, I do see it as a form of energetic protection because, yeah, think about it. If we were to like succeed and progress and like have a lot of flow in a like way, or a way of operating, number of habits, or whatever it is that like are not good for or sustainable for us, we'd never stop fucking doing it, or we'd never reevaluate. So how can we see the stagnancy and the stalling actually as a form of energetic protection that's just kind of redirecting us back onto um, the un the unblocked path, the unblocked highway. And then how can we alchemize that frustration into motivation? And then the final thing I want to say is that at a certain point you have to kind of have, or it helps to have a objective perspective around like efficiency, right? Like what's actually efficient. Okay, well, like I could shit on myself, I could and like fight with myself and all of this stuff, but like at the end of the day, the like that's only creating more stagnancy, more stalling, because it undermines your confidence. It like basically undermine it's extremely inefficient for actually like progressing and excelling. Is like being an asshole to yourself and like fighting with yourself. So if for no other reason, just seeing it as an inefficient strategy, I think is really helpful. Um, and seeing that like the more that you can actually work with yourself, listen to all parts of yourself, what they want and need, and like progress or move forward in a way that actually works for you, the more you'll be able to progress. So you've got to befriend yourself and work with yourself as a teammate. And if that feels kind of like uncomfortable at first, you can think of it as just a matter of efficiency. It's simply inefficient to try to create progress by being an asshole to yourself, right? Like by fighting yourself. It's simply inefficient. So thanks for tuning in, you guys. I really appreciated your shares. Um, hell yeah. Um, I hope that some of these perspectives were helpful for you, and you're going to be totally okay. And in fact, it's going to be wonderful. That's something I say to myself. And this comes from a moment Ben and I went to Sedona, like the vortexes in Sedona, Arizona, and we had this little thing. We were both kind of going through a hard time at that time. Um, and we decided to like do this incantation where we'd be like, everything is okay. In fact, it's wonderful. And then we throw up our hands. In fact, it's wonderful. So, anyway, you can borrow that little refrain if you want. It's nice to see you as well. Yeah, you too. All right, I'll catch you later.